I'm Jamey Bradbury, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Anderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Jamey Bradbury.
I'd like to thank some sponsors who, due to their generous support of the show, help bring this to you each and every time we bring you the show. From Eamon Ambrose, author of the best-selling sci-fi serial 0 Hour, comes a new novelette, Love and Other Algorithms. When Frank, a personal robot assistant, meets a similar model named Shelley, they are inexplicably linked and form an instant bond. But when outside forces conspire to separate them, Frank must decide how far he will go to save their relationship. However, all is not as it seems, and as Frank searches for Shelley, he learns that they are both part of something much, much bigger. Out now from Amazon, Love and Other Algorithms by Eamon Ambrose. Hey authors, are you looking for a beautiful professional cover for your science fiction or fantasy book? Holly Heisey Designs offers custom illustration and cover design with characters that will put your people center stage, spaceships designed from the ground up, and scenery that makes your world come alive. Visit Holly Heisey Design to book a custom cover or view pre-made ebook covers ready to purchase. Holly is an award-winning illustrator and designer who's done work for the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, the Future Chronicles anthology series, and USA Today and Amazon.com best-selling authors. Holly will bring your story world to life and get you a cover that will help sell your book. Visit hollyheiseydesign.com for more information on how to book your custom cover design or purchase pre-mades, as well as join the Holly Heisey Design Facebook group for discounts and first dibs at all the new spaceship and fantasy pre-made covers. Find all of this at hollyheiseydesign.com. A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson, a military sci-fi political thriller set just a short decade from now in 2031, holding to the concept of individual liberty can get you killed. Western civilization is in collapse, a process led and driven by the world's leading supposed democracies, our own included. What was once the Western world's guiding light of liberty is quickly being replaced by state-sponsored serfdom under the guise of a global economic reset done in the name of the workers. This is an exciting new novel by an exciting new talent, a debut novel, the first in a series from a former CIA operations officer who has decided that his lifelong writing habit, hobby, obsession is more fun than real work. Go pick up a copy today of A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson. There's a link to all of our great sponsors in the show notes at hankgarner.com. Stick around at the end of our excellent interview today for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. As always, thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Jamey Bradbury on the show with me. She has a brand new book that's releasing very soon. It's called The Wild Inside, and it looks to be very exciting. Welcome to the show, Jamey.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure, I'm happy to have you. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Well, I remember writing stories as early as first or second grade. I remember my first short story was a story about a boy who moves to a new town and can't make friends at school, but he does manage to make friends with a monster instead. And early on, I remember writing plays and forcing my cousins and my little brother to perform in them.
Of
so I was kind of a
course.
little tyrant. Yeah. Director, writer, producer, everything. But I recall that it wasn't until about third grade that I realized that writing was something that some people did for a living. I had one of those great teachers, her name was Mrs. McMichael, who would read aloud in front of the class every day. We got through all of the Super Fudge books and all of those kind of books And I just remember her really encouraging us to try our own hand at writing. And she actually gave every student a blank bound book and told us, put your story here. And when I did that and gave it back to her, she said, you're pretty good at this. You might think about pursuing this and really cultivating this talent. And that's when I kind of realized, there are people in the world who actually write the books that we've been reading. But I was a bizarrely practical kid. I knew, even early on, I knew that I needed a backup job. So I also was making plans to be a DJ or maybe a veterinarian while I was also writing.
And all of those seem perfectly complimentary.
Right? Yeah. Who doesn't know the famous DJ/writers out there? /veterinarian. Right. That's exactly.
Amazing. That's amazing. Those teachers are the real superheroes in this world. I've heard so many stories in interviewing authors about that teacher or that adult, whomever it was, but it seems to be a lot of times teachers, who just notice something in a kid and give that little bit of encouragement. And that's all it takes, just a spark and the fire's lit. I love those people.
It's so true. And I've been so lucky to have several teachers in my life who fostered my creativity. I mean, Mrs. McMichael was one of the first ones, but, in junior high and high school and even in college, I had so many teachers who really encouraged me and gave me the time and space to write.
Absolutely. And it goes without saying that Superfud is my spirit animal. My children, I'll scream at them, eat it or wear it all the time, and they roll their eyes and they're like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, it's a generational thing. You wouldn't get it. But
maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Judy Blume, God bless her. So you had these ideas of knowing that you needed a backup while you kind of worked on your creativity. What did you decide to do when you got grown?
Well, it's funny. I don't remember ever making a real decision. As an undergrad, I thought that, teaching and writing seemed like a good marriage. But I very quickly also realized that I wasn't actually a small kid person or even a teenage kid person. So I decided I wasn't going to be a school teacher and ended up getting my degree just straight in English and minoring in creative writing. And then out of college, I really didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do, but my mom actually suggested that I join a volunteer program called AmeriCorps. And so for the first 2 years out of college, I was an AmeriCorps volunteer. I worked with at the American Red Cross as a disaster response volunteer. And so I did things like show up at people's houses when their houses had just burned down. And I made sure that they had a place to stay that night, something to eat, clothing on their back, and that they felt safe after this disaster affected them. So that kind of launched me into the world of nonprofit work. And I floated around for quite a while trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do in the nonprofit world. And very gradually, I ended up in the job that I have today. I work full-time at an Alaska Native social services agency. I live in Alaska. And at that agency, I tell the stories of the people that we help on a daily basis. So I am a communication specialist. And it's the first time I've had this job for 2 years. And it's really the first time that I've had a job where I feel like I'm doing good in the world, but I'm also using the gifts that I have and the thing that I like to do to help people. So it's a great marriage between my full-time job and, what I love to do, which is write fiction.
Well, I know listeners are sick of hearing me talk about it, but one of my favorite things about the show is kind of discovering the circuitous route that people take to get where they are. And like you said, I never really made a decision about what I was going to do. And that's true for me. And that's true for so many, creative people, period. There's just kind of this desire to do this thing. And, we kind of have these boxes that we put career in and all of that. But, the creative life, the writing life, the storytelling life really takes so many different shapes. And of course we get a fantastic novel, a lot of times, but, the writer's life is, sometimes communicating with people and learning how the power of story, or just the way that we, learn to break down barriers with people. Those are the fulfilling things that fill in all of the rest of life. And, so I love that's been true for you as well.
Definitely. And, I find myself so moved when I talk to the people that my organization has assisted and lifted up. And it's really compelling. My supervisor tells me we can talk all we want about the work that we do and the goal that we're trying to reach, but it's really the stories of the people that frankly attract people who are going to support our organization and actually allow us to do the work that we do. I was telling my supervisor that I get so moved by the stories that I hear from the people we work with that sometimes I find myself kind of tearing up. It's a little embarrassing, but that's the power of a good story.
Absolutely. You mentioned that you live in Alaska now. Were you born in Alaska, or are you a transplant?
I'm a transplant. That AmeriCorps program actually brought me up here. I thought I was coming up to Alaska to live for 9 months, work with Red Cross, and then I'd go somewhere else after that. But as happens to a lot of people who think that they're just coming to Alaska for a short time, I fell in love with the state. I developed a small family of friends up here, and the landscape is just breathtaking. I thought, if I stay in Alaska long enough, eventually I'll get tired of all these gorgeous mountains and the beautiful ocean. But no, it doesn't happen. You still are just slack-jawed all the time because it's so beautiful.
I have a writer friend, Craig Martell, that lives in Alaska also, and he lives way up north, and he posts photos on Facebook all the time, and it's this magical place. And I think he has probably a similar attitude. You come thinking it's going to be for a little bit, but you just kind of get sucked into the magic of the place. It's crazy how place does that to you.
It really is. And Alaska, you've read my book, and so you know that it's significant in the book. That's the setting of the book. But Alaska as a place is just so inspiring, I think, for a fiction writer. It's not just the terrain, but also just the atmosphere. First of all, having a dark winter for so long, that's very encouraging for a writer. What else are you going to do? You either go outside and freeze or stay inside.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, I was asking about Alaska because you're right. The setting, not only is it the setting of the book, but Alaska is very much a character in the book. And I love it when a writer pulls that off, when it just seems that the place and, the characteristics of the place and the people and the interactions of the, it's this really strange thing, but when it kind of, when the writer embodies that and you get a feeling like that Alaska is a part of the book, it couldn't be any other way. What was it about, Alaska that first, other than the stories you were hearing from people you were working with, what was it about Alaska that first, kind of drew you in when you moved there?
Well, Alaska was actually exerting its pull on me before I even came up here. That first year in AmeriCorps, I was working with another young woman who had lived here. She had lived down in Juneau for some time. And so she was showing me photos of her trip to Juneau and telling me about Alaska. And I was just completely overtaken by a desire to come here. As a kid, I had been pretty interested in wilderness survival books and adventure books, and I wanted to go on my own adventure. And so when the opportunity to come to Alaska arose, I grabbed it. Once I was here, it really was just that sense that you can walk outside your door and have an adventure that I fell in love with. I live in Anchorage, which is quote unquote the big city in Alaska, which it's not a big city at all. But in Anchorage, the great thing about living here is you have all the amenities of a city, but I literally have to drive maybe 10 minutes to get to the middle of nowhere in the mountains. And so knowing that adventure just for me right outside my door and that I can be completely immersed in nature in just a few minutes is one of the things that I really love about living here.
That and Alaska, well, like a lot of cities and well, like a lot of states, have a unique heritage and culture, and the way they've grown and modernized, really, it's an interesting character to the place. And Alaska is a place like that with a really interesting history and, culture. Was there anything about Alaska that surprised you when you moved there, and maybe learning about the way it is now, or how it has evolved over time, or maybe remnants of things that are still there that make it very uniquely Alaska?
This might come from the nature of the day job that I have, but I was surprised at what a long memory Alaska has. I mean, it really is a pretty young state in the grand scheme of things, but
Right.
our history goes way past statehood, obviously.
Sure.
And just working with Alaska Native people, it really gives you a sense of that long history and that long memory. I mean, every day I see people who are still carrying out the traditions of their ancestors. I mean, there are teenagers that I work with who, they still talk to their elders. They still learn from the elders' stories that are in their lives. And they take those stories and they still live out the traditions that, they grew up with. I mean, they're modern. I mean, you see these kids texting and they're working in, we have this thing called the fabrication laboratory with all these really modern tools, but these kids are using these modern tools like 3D printers and laser cutters to make things like traditional masts and traditional kayaks. And so I think that's also another surprising thing, is just the way that culture and tradition and history and modernity kind of crash together to make something beautiful in this state.
It's really fascinating. Where I live, in South Mississippi, we are about 25 miles from a Choctaw Indian reservation. And, it's a big one. And they have these, cultural heritage festival, during the summer. And, a lot of times we'll go and you see the same kinds of things. There are all of these, historic, things that they reenact and go through, and the kids walking around texting, and it's such a hodgepodge of new and old, and the really unique things that come out of the crashing of those two things together. It's crazy, but
yeah.
So when did you first start thinking about this book, The Wild Inside? What was the what was the catalyst for that book?
So a lot of the things that I write start with an image that is interesting enough to me to make me start asking questions about it. I started thinking about what would become The Wild Inside as early as grad school. I went to grad school back in 2007 to 2009. And I just had this image in my head of a solitary house in the middle of a clearing in the forest. The lights were lit up against a really cold, dark Alaskan night. And I knew that inside that house there were two people, and I thought they were two men, and they were waiting for a third person to come back, and they were really worried about her. That's all I knew. So I, of course, was like, who is this person that's lost outside in the woods? Why are they waiting for her? What's happened to her? When is she coming back? From there, I lived with that image for a really long time, and I had no idea what the story behind it was. Later on, I was working a job in Vermont for a while, and while I was living there, I read a book called Some of Your Blood by Theodore Sturgeon. And it's kind of a vampire novel. It's a 1960s novel. And I was really compelled by some of the ideas in that novel, and the protagonist of that book is a man. And I kept thinking, what if the protagonist of this book were a woman instead? And that idea married with that image that I had in my head sort of came together and created the story behind The Wild Inside.
The book is is a very tense thriller. Were you a fan of thrillers before? Have you or were those types of books that resonated with you?
I like thrillers quite a bit, but I honestly thought I was writing a horror novel when I started.
Well, there's kind of a fine line there sometimes.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, genre is really hard because it's very easy to kind of slip from one to the other a lot of times. I mean, some of them are really closely related. But I've always been a horror fan. I mean, I grew up cutting my teeth on Stephen King and writers like that. So, and I really love horror novels that kind of bring more ideas to the table, something that kind of straddles maybe both the genre and the literary. So that's what I thought I was writing. But because my protagonist is a first-person narrator, I think that my book ends up feeling more like a psychological thriller because you're just inside her head so much, and she's driving the story. And so it just kind of creates this tension when, she doesn't know all the answers and she's searching for them, and you're right there searching along with her.
Well, that brings up a great thing to talk about. What do you think separates horror from like deep psychological thriller? Because both of them, we've got someone in peril. We have things that are going horribly wrong, and both of them can give you scares and get the heart palpitations going. Where does the line come between psychological thriller and horror to you?
That's an interesting question. I mean, maybe part of it is point of view and how close you are to the protagonist. I also think that with horror, you have to work really carefully to build a world in which your reader is going to accept that unreal things are possibly going to happen. And that certainly happens in my book. There's a little, element of the supernatural that worms its way inside. And I don't see that as much in psychological thrillers. Maybe I'm not reading enough psychological thrillers.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Kind of the fantastical elements in horror sometimes.
Exactly. And I think it's a really delicate thing to, especially when you're trying to write something that's horror that's also very grounded in the real world, you kind of really have to work hard not to lose your reader once you start introducing those fantastical elements into the story.
Right. And keeping a lot of the action or the horror elements kind of off screen, if you will, maybe helps, but also kind of keeps it in that thriller part where something's going on, but you just can't quite place it yet.
It's true. It's definitely, thrillers definitely have that element of mystery and needing to ask questions and needing to search for an answer, and coming up against these obstacles that, maybe put your main character in peril.
Right. So your protagonist, Tracy Petrikoff, tell me about her. Where did she come from? I know you had this idea of that kind of haunted you for a while, but when did Tracy kind of become fully formed for you? She
became completely gelled in my head as a person when I was writing early drafts of this book. The book started out as kind of an epistolary novel. There were letters between a couple different characters related to Tracy, and then there was Tracy's journal. So early on, I was trying to write in a voice of her in her journal, like the way that she would actually write as a teenage girl. And once I started hearing her voice in my head, she just, boom, became a person like out of thin air. I found her voice so compelling, so charismatic, so interesting. I just wanted to follow her wherever she went. And she has those traits that I really liked in books that I read when I was growing up, those adventure novels and wilderness novels. She loves to go outside and trap and hunt. And I just find, I'm not a trapper or a hunter, but I find it really interesting, that kind of activity and just, the ability to be out in the woods for a really long time and be at peace in nature, but also find adventure in nature. Tracy just kind of had all of those things that I found really compelling.
Speaking of being outside and the kind of that survival kind of aspect, one part of the setting, I thought was brilliant that you used that really gives you the opportunity to place, the story. There was the Iditarod is a very prominent part of the story. How did you decide to use that, and have you gotten to witness and take part in that?
Oh my gosh, the Iditarod. It's actually Iditarod weekend right now.
Oh, wow.
We're ramping up for that. Yeah, it's very exciting. The Iditarod is one of those things, I think, that when you're an outsider and you come to Alaska, it's just kind of captivating. I mean, the idea that somebody would get 16 dogs, hop on the back of a sled, and travel 1,000 miles across the state in the dead of winter is just, again, it calls to that adventurous side of me.
It's one of those things it's one of those things that those of us in the lower 48, we just like take our hat off and, salute the great Alaskans, because that's an awesome thing.
I mean, isn't that just emblematic of Alaska?
It is. It absolutely is.
Right. So, my first year up here, when I was a volunteer, we used to do a lot of volunteer activities outside of our work, and one of them was we actually visited a musher, and we got to hang out with the dogs, and we got to get on the back of actually a four-wheeler because we didn't have enough snow, but the dogs were leading the four-wheeler, so we got to do a little bit of dog sledding, and I think I was hooked from then on. I just really love following the Iditarod. I really love reading about the lives of the mushers. And so when I knew Tracy was, living in rural Alaska and growing up alongside animals, it was just natural for her to want to become a musher. I mean, she says in the book that she knows the minds of dogs, and I think, if she could choose, she might actually be a dog if she had the ability to do that. So yeah, it was just like a natural setting for her, and it also gave me an excuse to read a lot about the Iditarod.
I bet. Tracy, of course, as any good protagonist is, she comes with some baggage and some things that she's working through and dealing with. She's lost her mother. She has a relationship with her dad who he doesn't want her to do what she's doing, so she sneaks around. So, the relationship with her father is strained, and that puts her in a really interesting place, when she meets Jesse Goodwin. Tell us about Jesse Goodwin and, how he comes into the story.
Jesse Goodwin is kind of that stranger who comes into town and really shakes things up. Tracy is really distrustful of him because there are some weird things that have been going on around the house, and she knows that there's some kind of stranger behind it. And so when Jesse shows up, she automatically thinks, oh, this is the guy. He's been causing all the trouble. And I think it's a good excuse for her to ignore that the trouble that she's been causing herself. That when he shows up, he's kind of her scapegoat for a little while. But he's a mysterious character because he's got a secret, and Tracy doesn't love other people's secrets. She's perfectly happy to keep secrets of her own, but when it comes to other people keeping things from her, that's not her thing. She's not too into that. She wants to know exactly what's going on, in part because although she has that strained relationship with her father, she's actually really a family girl. I mean, she loves her family and she wants to protect it. And so when Jesse shows up, she sees this stranger that she needs to learn about and perhaps fight against because she's got her family's best interests. She thinks, anyway, their best interests in mind.
Well, and that's where the great tension comes from, is because even though her relationship with her dad is a little strained and she's, sneaking around, her love of her family is what really makes it so tense, that, you're because you're feeling, what her true intentions are while watching her do things that you wish she wasn't doing. It's like, as a reader, you're like, oh no, don't do this trait. And then you turn the page. Oh God, she did it, and as a reader, that's what really sucks you in. Do did you enjoy writing? Is there kind of a dark glee that comes from writing those kinds of things?
A dark glee, I like that. Sometimes I definitely felt a little evil. Like, why are you doing this to these perfectly nice people? But I can't remember who said it, but there was some writer who I read at some time who said, your job as an artist, your job as a writer is to make things hard for your characters. I mean, nobody really wants to read a book where somebody has a perfectly happy life and does nothing and has no problems. So I kept thinking about that as I was writing this. Like, my job here is to make things hard for Tracy. And I certainly do that. And honestly, sometimes I felt really bad about that, especially when Tracy's problems and her conflicts spilled over to affect other people in the novel. I mean, there's a character named Helen in the novel who does nothing to bring hardship on herself, but Tracy really makes things hard for her. So it's really tough sometimes when you see your character making terrible decisions and you're thinking, this is really bad for your life, but it's really great for the story.
Right. I definitely could tell that you probably grew up as a Stephen King fan because your portrayal of characters in a lot of places, your character is very three-dimensional in that, when you first meet Jesse, I'm thinking that he's Randall Flagg, but then maybe he's not, but then, well, crap, maybe he is. And, you really have this great way of kind of turning the camera all around a character and getting a lot of different visions of them, a lot of different versions of them, because we as people are that way. We are not just one way, and there's a lot of complexity to people. Did you learn anything about writing these characters that maybe surprised you about how to portray people to make sure they're not just cardboard cutouts of people?
I think one of the things that surprised me writing the book and learning more about character and how important it is that I get really wrapped up, especially when I try my hand at short stories, I get really wrapped up in plotting and like making sure that the plot is really tight and that I'm keeping the reader's interest. And I'm always afraid that I'm going to lose the reader somewhere along the line. So the plot's got to be really tight and really compelling. But as a reader, I started thinking, the reason I read books is sure for plot, but the thing that I love best about books is being in a world that I enjoy being in and reading about characters that I feel really invested in. And so I started focusing more and more of my effort on trying to create characters that are really compelling and that a reader really is going to get invested in. And, you can't get invested in a flat stereotype or, a character that doesn't pop off the page. And so I did do a lot of work just trying to get to know my characters. And it's also, maybe this is another thing I learned. It's amazing how much you have to write and just let go of. I mean, for every page I wrote in this book, I probably wrote 5 or 10 more, just getting to know the characters and just getting rid of those pages.
Well, and as someone who naturally likes to plot, how did this book? I understand what you're saying about writing to learn the characters, and a lot of that kind of writing is discovery writing, and there are a lot of things that about the characters in your mind that maybe don't come out on the page, but those things are essential to understand the character of the character, if you will. In the writing of the novel, did you, because there are some great, plot points and plot twists, were those planned out, or did the story unfold out of learning the characters and putting them in a situation of watching them react and behave?
There wasn't a whole lot of planning. I don't tend to plan too much because I find if I do an outline or if I plan too far ahead, the story starts to become kind of stale and a little rote to me.
Yeah.
So I did have to ask myself at every turn, now that you know these characters as well, what would they do in this situation? I write, I don't know if other people write like this. I feel like it's a weird way to write and waste a lot of time. But the way I write is I start a draft and I write until I get bored or I hit a wall and can't figure out how to get around that wall. And then I just go back to the very beginning and rewrite everything up until that point. And hopefully by that time, I know the answer and I can push through that wall. And I found with this book that method, although it's really time consuming and takes a lot of typing, it works really well in that I get to, it just forces me to get to know my characters really, really well because I spend so much time with them. And I spend so much time questioning, well, is this really what he would do now that I know this about him? Would Tracy really have this reaction now that I know her a little bit better? And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I got to know my characters and how I plotted out the novel. I just kind of lived the story with them. And I mean, I do plan out a little bit. I'm a runner, and so a lot of ideas for how to solve certain problems in my book will come to me while I'm running, which of course means that I have to stop running and text myself or send myself a voice message so I don't forget this great idea that just came to me while I was in the middle of a run. So I do plan out a little, but just by inches, not by feet or yards or miles.
When you're running, do you kind of stew on the story and roll it around in your head? A lot of times that works for me, getting away from the computer, going do something else and just kind of living with the characters a little bit. That's a big help for me.
Definitely. Yeah. I've had some of my better ideas when I've gone on running. I was training for a marathon while I was writing most of this book. And, I'd be like 15 miles into a run and go, oh my gosh, wish that I had like a portable typewriter with me, which would be really heavy to carry on a run. But, so I do, there's just something about movement and kind of letting your mind go a little blank and just kind of live in its own space. I'm like, I don't even have to be thinking about the book a lot of the times, and just out of the blue, something will occur to me, some sort of idea. And I don't know, I think it's because running is maybe the closest I can get to a meditative state. And maybe there's something about that state that just allows ideas to kind of grow and blossom in your head, even when you're not fully aware of it.
Yeah, I definitely would agree there. The new book, The Wild Inside, is releasing, when you're listening to the show, listeners, that, the book will be available. Go pick up a copy of it. I think you're going to love it. Jamey, what are you up to now after finishing this book and turning it in, and living with these characters for so long? How do you just walk away from them and give those characters up?
Well, fortunately, I haven't had to completely give them up, because I've been talking about the book so much lately. So that's been great. It's been kind of a great way to revisit the characters. I kind of missed them after, I finished the book and finished doing edits on it. So it's been great to kind of revisit them. But I pretty much jumped right into drafting my second novel, which I'm pretty excited about. So I've been working on that novel lately.
Nice. Well, I can't wait to see what comes out of that one and where you take us as readers. I'm really excited to see that. And I'm really excited for everybody to get their hands on The Wild Inside. Congratulations on it, and I wish you a tremendous amount of success with it.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really nice.
Where can people find you online, Jamey, if they want to kind of follow along and learn more about you, pick up your book, all of that good stuff?
Oh, sure. I am on Facebook as Jamey Bradbury Writer, my Facebook page. I am on Instagram as Jamey B. That's JameyBee, like the insect. And then I'm just Jamey Bradbury on Twitter, and my website is jameybradbury.com.
Perfect. Jamey, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I was 10 years old when I saw my first ghost. The year was 1770. My father was a barber. He kept a small shop at the Couenhoven Inn, where the King's Road met the Old Loop. Our modest home lay to the north, between the inn and the hanging tree. A simple box of pine boards whitewashed with crushed oyster shell, one room with a spinning wheel for mother, a chair for father, and up a ladder of branches, a garret where my parents slept. I slept on the floor below, alongside my little brother, Hans, 5 years younger than I. Our floor sloped toward the Hudson, so that when Hans rolled over in his sleep, he often went on rolling and couldn't stop, collecting splinters and grievances. Yet on this particular night, he slept peacefully, and I was the fitful one. A mouse had taken shelter in our wall, fleeing the October chill. It scritched and scratched, nibbling a nest for itself. The sound thrilled me. I possessed a vivid mind, full of toadstools and bullfrogs and lightning storms, and so imagined a skeleton writhed in the wood. The bones of Anne Underhill, perhaps, murdered by Indians at Spook Rock. I'd heard that tale from my father, who reveled in the Dutch superstitions. He would gather us to fireside on winter nights and spin tales of the Heer of Dunderberg, that storm king who rattled our white windows, of the Lady of Raven Rock, who died in snowfall, pining for her lover, of trolls beneath the penny bridge and hobgoblins in the hanging tree. He'd filled my head with such dark romance that I lay waiting for Anne's little finger bones to drag me off to some bloody fate. I rather hoped she would. A cloud cleared the moon, and a square of light fell on my mother's spinning wheel. The sharp spindle glinted, and the wheel began to turn, without touch. A figure appeared before me, as through a mist, a grey head bent to the work. She fixed me with eyes black as open graves and whispered in a low, guttural hiss, "Spin, or you shall not eat." I cried out and fell to my pallet, arms over my head. Hans awoke, lost his balance, and rolled away, bleating with pain as he struck the riverside wall. Father emerged above. "Agatha, what is wrong?" "There's a ghost, Papa. A ghost! Help me!" Hans laughed despite his bruises, and Mother moaned and ordered us to sleep. But Papa descended and took my hands, his blue eyes twinkling. "What did you see?" "An old woman. She said, 'Spin, or you shall not eat.'" "Oh!" He raised a candle beneath his chin. "You saw old Willow. She lived here long ago, when this was the home of Isaac Hart, our candle maker. Her husband was killed by savages. Hart took her in at the request of Lord Phillips, who paid a token sum for her upkeep. But Hart was greedy, and kept the money for himself. He never fed her unless she spun. So Willow spun and spun and spun, like a spider, year by year, growing old and blind and falling to waste. She died at that spinning wheel, fell over one day, and the spindle pierced her heart." Hans screamed and hid beneath the table. Mother appeared above. "Daniel Van Ripper, you are a fool." I kissed Papa's fingers, for I loathed that spinning wheel. I'd be no toothless ghost spinning and haunting little girls. I felt pity for such a spirit and gratitude to have her example before me, steeling my resolve. Every night thereafter, I would leave a crust of bread for old Willow and sleep with one eye open, in case she came to spin for me again.